Welcome to Dark Loops Productions, Dragons in the House, a podcast for discussing HBO's House of the Dragon. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. And agreeing to podcast this series with me is some of my better friends, my best friends. I'll let them introduce themselves and tell you a little something about their favorite memory of Game of Thrones. And we'll start with Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I'm a public radio producer and podcast producer based out of Chicago, Illinois. I would have to say my favorite Game of Thrones memory was probably watching Game of Thrones with my friends back in Baltimore. It really became a ritual for us to get together and, spend some quality time together watching the show. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And how about you, Stanford?
Hi, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist coming out of Chicago. I'm also the manager for community engagement at the University of Chicago Oriental Institute.
Fantastic.
I was going to say one of my favorite Game of Thrones moment was I was watching Game of Thrones in the kitchen. It was like 4 years ago with my daughter. She wasn't yet a teenager, and she kind of wandered in, and she was like, "What are you watching?" And it's the scene where they're trapped on the ice and they're trying to fight off the zombies, and people are dying just left and right, and she's watching. She's like, oh, okay. And like almost no reaction to all these people dying. And then they had this scene where the walker killed the dragon and the dragon went down, and she burst into tears and screamed and just marched out and cried for the next 10, 15 minutes. And when I went to console her, I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, they killed the dragon. And I'm like, what about all those people? She's like, it doesn't matter. They killed the dragon.
No, that's fantastic.
So I know what team she is.
You know what team she's, Team Dragon for sure. So my favorite memory of Game of Thrones, it's kind of cultural, right? You guys know Leandra. Leandra's family used to come over every Sunday night. We'd watch it. Sister Peak Productions was doing a podcast, and that's when I became known as Sir Zombie Scotty. And they did a Sister Speak family reunion in Nashville in 2017 that coincided with the first ever Con of Thrones. So it was a con completely devoted to Game of Thrones. My sister Connie and I, we cosplayed Jamie with no hand and Brienne of Tarth in the bear pit.
Nice.
And the entire Sister Speak Nation that was there, they were in the audience screaming for us. It was an absolutely fantastic experience. And then we decided to do a little bit of an act while we were on the stage, because that's what cosplayers do. So we did this little scene with Jamie trying to pretend like he could protect And what I love about this image is these are the judges, and you can just see the smiles on their faces, right? Those are just fantastic memories. And I'm hoping that this show will provide a context for, more of that love, right? Because even the show was so violent. We just loved it. And so we're going to talk here a bit about the first episode of House of the Dragon. We'll start with Cianna. Cianna, why don't you tell us your favorite line, favorite scene, favorite character, whatever the item that stuck out to you the most about this episode?
I'll say my favorite scene was the second scene. Well, the first scene after the opening credits, where we see the origin, I guess we could say, of Daenerys's fateful fight over King's Landing. It was very different. It was very bright. They did a really great job reintroducing King's Landing.
Yes, they did. Absolutely.
And it was breathtakingly beautiful. I kind of felt a lot of that same wonder I had when I was watching Game of Thrones and when I first saw, King's Landing in that series. The Red Keep looked beautiful. The Dragon Pit looked really cool. I also like that you saw small folk on the ground. And I have a sense that with this show, one thing that was missing from the original Game of Thrones series, which was fairly prominent in the books, were the perspective of these small folk and the people on the ground who were sort of caught in the middle between this clash of kings.
Right.
So already we have a few interactions with the small folk, and hopefully we hear some more of those fascinating stories. But yeah, I love that opening scene. You kind of felt in your pit of, like the pit of your stomach that, wow, Dany, really?
Right. No, that's
the interesting thing about that. It's like she destroyed that city.
Yes.
She's decimated, but she decimated her own family's legacy.
Yes.
A Targaryen built the Red Keep. I mean, they built that city, and it says a lot for, being the last, it says a lot about being, maybe a lonely only and not having that connection to family and legacy.
Oh, I love it. I think yeah.
It made me a little sad too.
Yeah,
and sad, which is I think we're on track for Game of Thrones.
No, well, you're drawing my attention to the parallel with with her final flight, as it were, and that's very smart, because in the way they presented it was kind of blissful and light, and they were just flying, and that gets juxtaposed against what we know is coming couple hundred years down the road.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Yeah.
How about you, Stanford?
I'm going to say a lot of people that I know were, had misgivings about the first episode, or felt like, oh, this first episode didn't match up to the first episode of Game of Thrones. And I got to say, I liked this first episode more.
Okay.
I did not come to the show with a lot of high hopes. But the thing that was interesting to me is that one of the things that I least liked about Game of Thrones was not present in this one, and that is magic. I felt like I really felt like in terms of the world building, that what always worked best for me in terms of Game of Thrones was this idea that you have all the it's the politics, right?
Yeah.
And that works. And as far as the dragons are concerned, I mean, I don't have a problem with the dragons. I don't see the dragons as magical. I just see them as these creatures that we that are extinct, right? So if you can fall back on a medieval times and some critters we don't see anymore, everything just makes a lot more sense. I've just always felt like they never made the magic make sense. There wasn't enough logic to it, so it felt too much like the writers were just kind of, oh, I need to make something happen. How do I do that? Magic, right?
Right.
So I like that. I like the simple setup of they essentially put all the pieces on the table, and I thought that was really interesting too, because I remember watching the first season of Game of Thrones, I felt like I didn't really know where it was going until we got to the second season. I mean, because the whole thing, Sean Bean going down to help rule, that's actually what kicks off.
Right.
Baratheon has to die, but he survives the first season, right? So the problem with Game of Thrones, or it's not really a problem. It was still fun to get there, but you didn't really have a true sense of where it was going. Then you have the stuff with the White Walkers, and they never paid it off. Whereas this, I'm like, okay, I get what's at stake here. I think that I still think that that the jury's still out in terms of how they're going to handle certain things, as far as how do they manage the brutality in all of this? How are they going to respond to essentially all the criticism of Game of Thrones in terms of in terms
Right.
of what it was doing in terms of sex and all of that. So
It's not like they
just-
did a whole lot of different stuff with sex. I mean,
Yeah.
it was there like it was in the last series. It's interesting because my experience, not my judgment, just my experience of the first episode was along a lot of the same dimensions you mentioned, but kind of different. So, for example, I loved the opening montage of Game of Thrones because it visually created a world for you. And it was cool, and it basically made the world bigger than the scenes you were seeing just by that opening scene. And then I dug the magic in Game of Thrones. What I didn't dig was the lack of narrative payoff about the magic, right?
Right.
The lack of narrative payoff about the Night King. And we've talked about this before. I think George, when the books are finished, we're going to know what Martin meant. He's going to tell us what he meant, and what we saw is not what he meant.
Right.
I don't think, given the quality of the story that they had to work with, and we saw in the first 5 seasons, I can't believe that that's how he envisioned everything actually turning out. So I dug the magic, and if they had paid off narratively with it, with the White Walker arc, and like maybe have Jacques and Jahar show up somewhere, the magic would have been more appreciated. One thing that it's interesting, because I love the politics of Game of Thrones. I love the nitty gritty in and out unpredictability. And that's one of the things that you said they got all the pieces on the table. It made this intro feel a little smaller to me than episode 1 of Game of Thrones.
Everything about this show feels small. And that's one of the things that I don't like about it. Everything feels very small
Local
and contained.
Yeah.
But I think that goes, there's a thread there. And I think that the showrunners are sending us a very clear message, maybe, if not assurance, like, we're focusing on one thing, folks.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's one
Right.
story. We're telling one story. It's actually Stanford's mom who made a comment about Game of Thrones that she doesn't care about the other 2 books. She doesn't believe they're coming. She says she said that George R. Martin was a very good writer, but he was kind of wild in his writing, right?
Right.
He doesn't really complete anything.
And well,
she said he can't. I mean, it maybe is too big. I don't necessarily agree, but I thought that was an interesting observation. I think, again, the showrunners are trying to say we're just on track with just one story, guys. And there is an end. I think.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think the way Martin wrote, and I think the way we saw all the content presented in Game of Thrones, there never is an end until the species goes away. So I think Martin would find a way to end it. So the narrative that story's over, but the story's not over.
When, Scott? When are we getting this book, Scott?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm just saying.
This sounds great, but when?
No. I have no idea. All I can say is I loved those first 5 seasons so much, and I had such robust friendship and cultural interactions all around the quality of the writing. That's unique to find a show that can draw in so many different people who can have fun in that space. And some of the stuff that happened at the end just let a lot of us down, and so we'll see. If they tell one story, that means that it might feel quite different from Game of Thrones all the way through.
And that's okay.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
As long as it's good.
Right. Well, I mean, let's look at Ozark. I don't know if you guys watched or like Ozark. I loved Ozark, and it's a very local flick, right? It's about one family, and then it follows them to Mexico, and that's about as global as it gets.
Right.
So you can do good work with local tragedy, local dynamics.
I don't think they're going to stay entirely local, because they made references to the Starks, to the Martells.
Right.
I think at some point we're going to have to deal with these other places.
But I think the story is it's very much the story of this, Targaryen family, this branch of the Targaryen family. When I say local, I mean it's not going to be this big, expansive, you get brotherhood with no banners, and there was just a lot of loose ends at the end of Game of Thrones, and I think
Yeah.
we're not going to have, because we have one book, we have a story that's written,
Right.
done, open and shut.
Well, I think that we are going to see a lot more of the world, in part because, you know, they've got 10 dragons and they can fly, right? Like I have this feeling at some point people are actually going to be moving around a lot. I also think that it's going to be hard for the people who are doing the show to resist the temptation to visit these other places that we know are out there. You know, what I do think is interesting, one thing I do think is interesting, and I'm curious to see how they pay it off, is what happened with the mother and the way she foreshadowed her death, right? Where she describes to her daughter that birth is a battlefield,
yeah.
right? You know, and then to see her so, just thoroughly just gutted to save a child that couldn't be saved. You know, I'm curious to see how they move forward. I did read one article where they said that we're going to see where they're going to have a lot more stuff having to do with other people giving birth as well. So I'm curious about that. I know that they also have multiple actresses for some of the characters, like younger versions and older versions.
Oh, okay.
So there's going to be a lot of time is going to be passing in this. You know, but I'm just curious to see how they balance it, because, you know, one of the things that always got me about Game of Thrones was on one hand, there, you know, especially with a lot of the sexual violence, they're like, well, back then it was just really brutal, as if this is really a back then, whatever, right? But my thought was always, if it's that brutal, right, it's not just going to be brutality coming from the men. And so I always wondered, like, you know, what happens when someone, you know, it's always like, what happens when someone gets power who's been on the hind end of things, right? You know, are we gonna see that type of revenge fantasy? I'm just curious to see how much they've learned and how they're gonna deal with it. You know, I also see a little bit with Matt Smith's character and you know, and the City Watch, right? Like you know, the way they just went in and just mutilated and killed all of those people and being like, well, they're criminals anyway. You know,
that set was really small. The alleys were very narrow, and they were.
It was one set.
Like, it just felt really tiny. Actually, my least favorite scene for that reason. I'm like, this is a soundstage. Like, this is not. It was really fake and really claustrophobic. I didn't like it.
Stanford, I agree with your assessment that they're gonna move out into, you know, into the realm. I do think, however, that they're going to tell it fairly locally through the Targaryen family. So, you know, in Game of Thrones, we got knee deep in Stark world, we got knee deep in Lannister world, right? We ended up being in all these different worlds. And I will see if they do. It depends on how many seasons they plan to do. But one of the, I'm going to use the word delicious things about the Game of Thrones series was the wartime concierge politics, that you just got to see the back room where they were talking about who they had to take out and why they had to take them out, and a little bit of, you know, medieval Godfather stuff going on everywhere. I have to admit, I find that stuff interesting, and you know, I think they'll probably go that route.
Is there, pardon me, and is there any better revenge than hopping on a dragon and just
Straight up.
Anthony?
Well, that's interesting because the revenge arc
Evaporating your enemy.
The revenge arc happened at the end of Game of Thrones, right? I mean, she burned that whole damn town down.
Vaporizing your enemies and people who you've never met.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that casualty of Dragonmore.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah, people you hate and people who you don't even know.
No, yeah. Well, you know, I just saw something recently where Martin said he had asked the guys to make Game of Thrones 10 seasons. And when you look at how compressed the last 1 and 2 were, you can see that if it had breathed at the pace of the first 5, that they could have gotten 10, and we would have gotten a better story about the Night King, the second most wasted villain in cinematic history, right up there with Thanos. You know, just villains that had a lot of space, lot of big space to cover, and basically weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Any sort of final comments and stuff you guys want to make on the show? What do you hope they do? How about we do that? What do you hope they do?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of, so I never read this book. I haven't read this book.
Mm.
And I'm really trying to go in with my eyes open and keeping my expectations,
Yes. Be drawn in by the characters, be drawn in by the narrative.
I want them to do exactly what Game of Thrones did. I want to be, like you said, drawn in by the characters, by the narrative, by the scenery, and I want to be entertained.
Yeah, I gotta say,
manipulated and deceived.
No. That first, if I'm not mistaken, the first episode of Game of Thrones had the Lannisters and visiting
the Starks. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you had the Starks, direwolf stuff, that whole Stark world.
You had walkers.
You had everything. Yeah, exactly.
You had the wall. I mean, they packed everything in there and just left it on a delicious cliffhanger. And
exactly. So we'll see what they do. How about you, Stanford? What do you hope they do?
This is going to sound really weird, but I kind of hope they keep it small. I hope that they this is going to sound weird, but I actually like the fact that the special effects are not quite where the special effects were for Game of Thrones, because I think it's gonna force them to actually focus on the writing. I really want to see a good story that really starts to get more knee deep into some of the complexities and some of the ramifications of the brutality. I mean, I felt like the way they handled the purge of all those criminals, in terms of the king being like, this is not good, and the council being like, this is not good. It tells me that the writers, may have been paying attention to current events. And
except for Corliss. No, except for Corliss.
Right.
The black guy was like, no, actually, this is great. People should be afraid of.
No, he was. No.
Like, damn it. Why?
But see, that could be an interesting play there, because if he backs the brother, and then the two brothers clash, right? His wife is destined to move into the spot, so he could be playing that game too, right?
Yeah,
I'm just,
I guess.
You never know.
And that's a weird angle. Like,
it is.
I love police brutality.
I'm giving it more intrigue than it has. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm actually intrigued by Corliss's character, because it's clear there's a lot of story there, and the fact that he's hitched himself to the queen that never was, right? I mean, I'm really curious to see what happens once we get deeper into this war for succession, because she has a claim as well, and as they said, she's got a claim and she's got a male heir.
Yeah, I got to tell you, when the last series ended, my major disappointment was that we didn't get a new story. Right, Game of Thrones had built itself up to really tell a medieval Dungeons and Dragons-y kind of tale that was new, and when they just fell into all the tropes in the last season, it's like, I loved this show because I believed. I loved what I was seeing, and I believed, and so I'm hoping for something bold. I'm hoping for something that I haven't seen before. I'm into the total local politics. If the dragons do end up being, I had no problem with the dragons being caught up with the magic. I thought the idea of the rise of the dragons and the White Walkers at the same time was a pretty cool, seasonal magical narrative that they just didn't cash out. So I'd like to see them. I would enjoy it if they played with that somehow, made the dragons a kind of magical force of nature, if you like. And it tied directly to the Targaryen bloodline. And then we got to hear the story of how the Targaryens. Well, actually, we already heard that story. I won't embarrass myself. Forget it. I won't say it, because they kept the line all the way up to the Mad King, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They kept the throne all the way there.
You know, I found that last scene where Viserys gives us the lowdown on Aegon's dream and the Song of Ice and Fire. And he says that, you know, there's this terrible darkness that's coming. It'll be the end of the world of men. And the only way the world of men will survive is if a Targaryen is sitting on the throne. Right?
Right.
So again, we're spinning prophecy, and I am excited. I will say I'm also excited about that because Daenerys Targaryen was not sitting on the throne when they defeated the Night's King.
No.
Cersei was. So again, to this theory that, you know, did the Mad King and Joanna Lannister
Yes.
have a thing? So I was like, wait, what?
I love it.
I love it. I think it's interesting. And this could also be, you know, again, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if that's in the book or if that's like Martin like retconning, like, I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is
I promise I'll fix it.
They went knee deep into Game of Thrones, right? With stating, okay, here's the plot of the series that we all just saw, right? And maybe by reminding of this that so robustly, they're setting up, as you said, you know, for a rewrite, so that, you know, maybe it turns out there's a sequel, you know, in which there is a Targaryen on the Iron Throne, and that Night King wasn't the real threat of the Night Walkers.
Right.
There's
Brand,
a new,
Night
you
King.
know,
Everybody knows it's Bran.
exactly, exactly.
I don't trust them.
So, the format of the show, we're going to come to you every week, and we in the House of Dragons are going to invite a guest every week, get their vibe on the show, and take it from there. So, colleagues, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we will start with Cianna.
Hi, you can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREAVES.
Fantastic. How about you, Stanford?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, TikTok, pretty much everywhere with SW Carpenter.
Fantastic. You can find all Dark Loops Productions recordings on YouTube at Dark Loops Productions. And now we're podcasting as well. So just type in Dark Loops Productions and you'll find both the podcast and the podcast. So please feel free to write in, and we'll read it, react to it, and have fun with it. All right, then. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs. And remember, all men must die.
Die.
Bye-bye.